Hello. Today I'm doing a review of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Magic the Gathering's newest set. Inspired by cyberpunk and Japanese mythology, it is the second time that the game has returned to the plane. I'm going to be reviewing the cards from a limited perspective only. In terms of the grading scale, we're going to have an S to an F rank. S are those that you first pick no matter what. A's are bombs and top removal spells. B are playable cards, happy to pick them. C is role players, decent cards that you will probably have quite a few of in your deck. D are just the dregs, what you don't want to play, but you can if you have to. F are cards that you never want to put in your deck. To begin with, we have the Ancestral Katana, 1 and a white for an artifact equipment. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, you may pay 1. When you do, attach Ancestral Katana to it. Equipped creature gets +2/+1, and it equips for 3. This is a solid equipment that'll fit best in the samurai or warrior deck, but even on its own, it can equip to evasive flyers or creatures with keywords. I'd give it a C. AO, the Dawn Sky, is 3 white for a legendary creature Dragon Spirit. It's a 5/4 and has flying and vigilance, and when it dies you get to choose 1. You can look at the top 7 cards of your library and put any number of non-land permanent cards with total mana value 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Or you can put 2/1/1 counters on each permanent you control that's a creature or vehicle. So obviously this is a mythic dragon, it's a huge bomb. An important thing to note, however, is the first trigger for the dice does not put in all the 4 CMC or less permanents, but rather just total 4. So generally speaking, when it dies it can either replace itself or give a huge buff to your whole team. It's definitely an S tier and one of the strongest creatures in the set. Next we have Banishing Slash. White for a sorcery. Destroy up to 1 target artifact, enchantment, or tapped creature. Then, if you control an artifact and an enchantment, create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance. This card is much better than it would be in other formats. Of course, 2 mana to destroy a tapped creature is always decent, but the fact that you can also get a 2/2 creature with it makes this one of the top uncommons in the set. In addition, artifacts and enchantments are much more frequent in this set. In fact, there's a total of 50 artifacts and 56 enchantments out of only 230 cards. That means that you will probably have one out, meaning this is not only just a removal spell, but it can handle pretty much any problematic permanents. The second condition may seem difficult, but like I said, there's a lot of artifacts and enchantments. And especially in white, enchantments are very frequent. There are 14, with only 1 of those at rare. Many of these are creatures or sagas as well, meaning they have an active presence on the board. I think this is an A tier spell. It is definitely the best removal in white, and one of the better cards. The only problem with it is sorcery speed, but I think the secondary condition will be enough that this is an easy 2 for 1. Befriending the Moss is next. 3 and a white enchantment saga. The first 2 chapters, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. Then you exile it, and it becomes a 2/4 moth with flying. It's also an enchantment creature. All the sagas in this set flip into creatures, while giving a decent benefit before then. This is one of the cards that seems innocuous, but it can definitely get in damage when you don't expect it. There's not a huge amount of flying in the set, so I think this is actually going to be one of the better cards in a white aggro deck. It's still not top tier, but it's a solid C or C+. Blade Blizzard Kitsune, 2 and a white for a 2/2 with double strike. It also has ninjutsu for 4, so you can return an unblocked attacker to your hand in order to put this into play tapped and attacking. Is a little bit of a letdown. A lot of the ninjutsu cards have effects when they deal damage, but this one doesn't, and white doesn't have the most evasive creatures. On its own it's a 3/3 double strike for 2, which is fine, so this may be a C-. Born to Drive, 2 and a white for an enchantment, aura, enchant artifact or creature. As long as enchanted permanent is a creature, it gets +1/+1 for each creature and vehicle you control. Channel, which is effectively an alternate cost. You can pay 2 and a white to discard it to create 2 1/1 colorless pilot creature tokens that can crew vehicles as though their power were 3. Most of the time this is going to be 3 mana, make 2 1/1s that can help crew vehicles. That's a fine rate. It's also instant speed, but sometimes you'll have that evasive creature and able to get in for decent damage. Just like all auras, it runs into the same problem of being 2 for 1 if you cast it for its primary mode. So, this is definitely a fine card, but not exciting. It's a C. Brilliant Restoration, 3 white. It's a sorcery. Return all artifact and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is definitely a constructed card. There are, however, significantly more artifacts and enchantments going into the graveyard than a typical limited format, because of the amount of creatures and sagas. Overall, though, this will be returning maybe 3 or 4 cards for 7 mana, including 4 white pips, which is very difficult unless you're in a mono white deck. Overall, this is maybe a D. It's one of those things where it might end up playing better than it looks, but it's a huge cost with a variable benefit. Cloudsteel Kirin. 2 and a white for an artifact creature, equipment Kirin. It's a 3/2 with flying that also has equipped creature has flying, and you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game with reconfigure 5. All the equipment in this set come out as creatures, sort of like Living Weapon from Mirrodin. However, you can pay a mana cost, typically a decently high one, to turn them back into equipment. In this case, it turns any creature into a Platinum Angel. On its own, against equipment light decks, that can just completely destroy them. All you need to do is equip it once or twice and they're dead in the air. Even on its own, it's a 3/2 flyer for 3, which is a solid rate. This card is a solid A and will win many games of Limited. Dragonfly Suit is 2 and a white for an artifact vehicle. It's got flying and is 3/2 with crew 1. While it's definitely no Smuggler's Copter, a flying and difficult to kill with sorcery speed removal 3/2 is very solid, and turning anything including the 1/1 spirit tokens or pilots into 3 flying damage is very strong. I think this is one of the best commons in the set, and it's a solid B. Django Exemplar, 1 and a white for an enchantment creature human samurai. It's a 2/1, and then whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, it gets +1/+1 until infinite. All of the samurai and warriors in the set have this thing similar to Exalted, where they need to attack alone in order to get a benefit. This one at least pumps the toughness, where a number of them don't. But on its own, it attacks as a 3/2, which is fine, and can help get in some flying damage. It's a C. Era of Enlightenment, 1 and a white for a saga. The first chapter is Scry 2. The next is Gain 2 life. Then it transforms into a 2/2 with First Strike. It's a fine card if you consider it to be a 2/2 with First Strike that also scries and gains you 2 life. That sounds like a lot for 2 mana, but the delayed creature is significant. If you're running into a deck that's not playing sagas and has all their creatures come on curve, then your delayed creatures will be significantly less effective. When you consider the 2/2 will come out on turn 5 at a minimum, that the body is just not that impressive. If your deck needs enchantments, this is a fine part of it, but overall it's a C or C-. The Fall of Lord Konda, 2 and a white. The first chapter is exile target creature an opponent controls with mana value 4 or greater. The second, each player gains control of all permanents they own. Then it flips into a 1/3 defender, and when it dies you draw a card. It's an uncommon. On its face, this looks good. Paying 3 mana to kill something that costs 4 gives you a benefit. And then eventually you get a defender that will draw you a card. The unfortunate part of this is where it falls on the curve. It only kills something that has mana value 4 or greater. That means you're never going to be able to play it on turn 3. It'll be on turn 4 or 5. Then you're able to kill a good threat, but the second stage will do nothing. There's very few mind control effects in this set, and all of them are at rare or greater. So then eventually, on say turn 7 or so, you'll have a 1/3 defender. It's still removal, but it's very situational, sorcery speed, and there will be some games where it just does nothing. Overall, this is maybe a D or a D+. Farewell is 4 white for a sorcery. Choose 1 or more. Exile all artifacts, exile all creatures, exile all enchantments, or exile all graveyards. The modality on this card makes it quite strong. Generally 6 mana wraths have not seen very good results in Limited. However, the ability to exile all artifacts and enchantments in a deck that's not necessarily playing those makes this quite strong. It is able to just clear up everything on the battlefield, and will definitely find its place in a deck if you build around it. I think this is a B+/A-. Go Shintai of Shared Purpose. 3 and a white for a legendary enchantment creature, a shrine. It's a 1/3 with vigilance. And then at the beginning of your end step, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless spirit token for each shrine you control. Shrines are back for the first time in quite some time. However, instead of just being enchantments that sit on the battlefield, now they're creatures, which unfortunately does make them significantly more vulnerable. In terms of Limited, it's important to remember these are legendary. Shrines are at their best when you can have as many of them on the battlefield at once, but they're all different colors. There's no real 5-color support, so the way to consider it is that you may have 2 or 3 if you're really stretching it. Of course, if you're paying 1 at the end step to get 2 1/1s, that's pretty solid. Generally, I think you'll play this on turn 5 to play and then get the immediate benefit of the 1/1 Or if you have another shrine out, get 2 1/1s. These can definitely grind an opponent down, just a little too vulnerable. This one's one of the better ones, as it impacts the board the most, but I don't think they're going to quite come together in Limited. I'd give this a C+. Golden Tail Disciple. 2 and a white for an enchantment creature, which is a 2/3 with lifelink. And Crimson Vow Kindly Stranger was one of the better commons in white. It was similar in cost to this, however, it also had an enchantment on the backside, giving another creature lifelink. Losing this makes this significantly worse. This creature's effectiveness really depends on how many 3-power creatures there are in the set. And given the amount of vehicles, and many of the sagas transform into 3 or more, this is just not going to be that effective. Give it a C- D+. Hotshot Mechanic. 1 and a white for an artifact creature, 2/1. Hotshot Mechanic crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. That means it can crew up to 4. This will crew basically every vehicle in the set, and it's also just a 2/1 for 1. This fits well in aggressive decks, and even ignoring the trinket tech, it's still an artifact, which is very relevant for a number of the things as we saw before. This is a solid B. Imperial Oath. 5 and a white for a sorcery. Create 3 2/2 white samurai creature tokens with vigilance. Scry 3. Creating a lot of tokens for a lot of mana is generally a decent effect, and here you're getting 6 power for 6 mana. The problem is the vigilance on these creatures are just not really relevant, as a single 2/3 shuts them down. It'll be a decent effect for a control deck, giving favorable blocks, and the Scry 3 can help find win conditions. Overall though, it's just a bit too expensive. I'd give this a C-. Imperial Recovery Unit. 2 and a white for a 3/4. Artifact Vehicle. Whenever Imperial Recovery Unit attacks, return target creature or vehicle with CMC 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand with crew 2. The play patterns on this are pretty solid. Let's say you play your 2-drop, attack with it, trades with their 2-drop, and then you're able to drop this. Next turn you can attack with a 3/4, which should be able to get in, or at least trade, and then you get back your card. And while that's definitely the best case scenario, I think it's not too uncommon, meaning this is just a really solid creature. I'd give it a B-. Imperial Subduer. 2 and a white, creature human samurai, 3/2. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, tap target creature you don't control. White creatures that tap down blockers have historically been quite strong. However, generally that was because you were able to attack with all your creatures. Having it only been when it attacks alone can be quite problematic. While there's definitely lines where this 3/2 is able to get in decent damage because of this, ultimately the whole attack alone just doesn't seem like it's going to work in Limited. This is a D+. Intercessor's Arrest. 2 and a white for an enchantment. Enchanted permanent can't attack, block, or crew vehicles. Its activated abilities can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. Basically this is the Arrest variant, but it shuts down almost everything. It's also common, and it is one of the best commons in the set. There's a few effects that blink things, and a couple that sacrifice things, but against most opponents this is just going to shut down their strongest creature, and that makes it very solid. This is a B+. Invoke Justice. 1 white, sorcery. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield, then distribute 4+1/+1 counters among any number of creatures and or vehicles target player controls. This is a very solid effect, returning your best creature and then powering up your team, but the white cost is definitely significant. Every color has these sort of effects, with a heavy mana cost, and I think this is one of the better ones. It's definitely something to consider when deck building in terms of lands, but it's very playable, and it's definitely an A-. There's also a little thing to note, that if the opponent somehow has graveyard removal, this also targets a player, meaning the counters still go on your creatures. Kitsune Ace. 1 and a white for a creature Fox Pilot, a 2/2. Whenever a vehicle you control attacks, choose 1. That vehicle gains first strike until end of turn, or untap Kitsune Ace. Giving a vehicle first strike is definitely a good way to win combat, as most vehicles have pretty good power for their CMC. Untapping Kitsune Ace is a very minor benefit, as it doesn't allow it to pilot 2 vehicles because of how the timing works, but allows it to chump block, which may come into play. This is one of the better 2-drops. It's definitely a solid C+. Kyodai, Soul of Kamigawa. 3 and a white for a flash flying 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, another target permanent gains indestructible for as long as you control Kyodai. And then for Wooburg, Kyodai gets +5/+5 until end of turn. So we can just cut off that last bit of text. But even on its own, it's a flash flyer 3/3 or 4. These are very good, and then giving indestructible to another creature is just gravy. It is important to watch out for blowouts with killing this and then killing the other, but generally speaking this is going to be a very solid pick. It's definitely an A. Light the Way. White. Instant. Choose 1. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature or vehicle, untap it. or return target permanent you control to its owner's hand. This is one of those limited combat tricks that they've been using quite a bit. The ability to untap a creature, in addition to giving a 1/1 counter, is significant, as well as modifying it, which is a mechanic that hasn't come up yet, but is frequent in other colors. Overall, this is never going to swing combat more than eating one of their creatures, or saving a creature from a removal spell. To that end, it's AC. Light Paws, Emperor's Voice. Legendary creature, Fox Advisor, 2/2. Whenever an aura enters the battlefield under your control, if you cast it, you may search your library for an aura card with mana value less than or equal to the aura with a different name than each aura you control. Put that card on the battlefield attached to Light Paw, Emperor's Voice, and then shuffle. Generally speaking, this is going to be a 2/2 for 2. Sometimes your removal spell will find you a slight buff, but in general, this is a 2/2 for 2 and should be picked as that. If you build your deck around it, it'll be slightly better, but this is just a C. Lion's Sash. 1 and a white for an artifact creature equipment cat, 1/1. For 1 mana, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a permanent card, put a 1/1 counter on Lion's Sash. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each 1/1 counter on Lion's Sash, with reconfigure for 2. While the graveyard hate is not going to be very relevant, this is a Scavenging Ooze type effect that also can eat artifacts and enchantments. While it's a little bit worse hunt-based, the ability to hide under other creatures, including flying creatures, is very significant, and this is one of the better equipments in the set. This is a very solid card that you'd be happy to first pick. It's an A-. Lucky Offering, 1 and a white. Sorcery. Destroy target artifact with mana value 3 or less. You gain 3 life. It's very unfortunate this only targets artifacts, as generally it's artifact or enchantment. Because of that, this is just not playable in the main deck. While there are a decent amount of artifacts running around, there's no guarantee they're going to be at the same time, and the fact that this doesn't hit the biggest ones is a huge downside. This is a D. Sideboard card only. March of Otherworldly Light. X and a white for an instant. This is a whole cycle, 1 in each color. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you can exile any number of white cards from your hand. It costs 2 less for each card exiled this way. Exile target artifact, creature, enchantment with mana value X or less. This is basically a power sink type effect, where you're going to have to pay 1 more mana than whatever their permanent was, but you can 2-for-1 yourself to help reduce that cost. The fact that this is general, can hit artifacts, creatures, or enchantments, and as exile, definitely brings it up in terms of removal, but you always have to pay the cost, whether it be cards or mana. As such, this is only a B. Ichigo's Reign of Truth, 1 in white for an enchantment saga. The first 2 chapters are target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each artifact and or enchantment you control. Then it flips into a creature, which gets +1/+1 for each artifact and enchantment you control. There are actually not very many cards that care about this sort of thing, the number of artifacts or enchantments. A few care about that you have one of each, but this is one of the very few that cares about the number. In the deck that it wants this is going to be very solid, allowing you to just plow through combat and then giving you a decent threat. But generally it's going to be a 3/3 or 4/4 for only 2 mana. Admittedly, you probably don't want to play this on turn 2, playing it later to buff up your creatures, but this is definitely going to put in work. It's a solid B-. Moth Rider Patrol, 1 in a white for a flying fox warrior, which also has 3 in white, tap target creature. 1/1 flyers for 1 are historically fine, and the ability to tap other creatures is significant, although the mana cost is pretty steep. However, because of ninjutsu, this actually goes quite a bit up in playability. It depends on the deck that you're running it in, as blue and black have the most ninjutsu, and they're the ones that you'd want to focus on. But in those types of decks, this is definitely going to be a good role player, so it's a C+. Norika Yamazaki, the Poet, 2 in a white for a legendary creature, human samurai. 3/2 with Vigilant. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, you may cast target enchantment card from your graveyard this turn. This effect is actually worse than it would be in other saga sets, because the sagas become creatures after they're used up instead of going into the graveyard. Because of this, and the fact that you have to send in a creature, it's much less benefit than you'd expect it to be. There's definitely times this is going to get you a couple of cards, but mostly it's a 3/2 for 3 with Vigilance, which is fine. It's a C, but it's not particularly exciting. Regent's Authority, 1 white for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If it's an enchantment creature or legendary creature, instead put a 1/1 counter on it and it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So this is a white combat trick that gives +2/+2. Sometimes it leaves around a little bit. In terms of combat tricks, this is able to shift some combats, but not the majority of them. Leaving the counter around can matter for modified creatures, but most of those aren't in white anyway. Overall, this is a pretty mediocre trick, and it's going to be a D. Repel the Vile, 3 and a white for an instant. Choose one. Exile target creature with power 4 or greater, or exile target enchantment. This effect is commonly seen in white, though given the option to exile an enchantment, it's also quite nice, as there are some sagas that you want to stop after their first chapter. Only hitting power 4 or greater can miss some important creatures. The majority of creatures we've seen so far have been 3 or less power, but this will kill the biggest things you need to kill. As such, it's a fine removal spell. It's maybe a C+, just because of how low to the ground many of the creatures in this set are. The Restoration of Ijango. The first chapter, search your library for a basic Plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. The next, you may discard a card. When you do, return target permanent card with mana value 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Then, exile it, and it becomes a 3/4 vigilance, that when it attacks or blocks, you get a 1/1. There's a lot of things going on in this card. And it gives you a lot of miscellaneous benefits. Tutoring out a land is good, and the second chapter can actually be ramped by discarding the land that you found. It can also just bring back miscellaneous creatures, or even some sagas. And then the 3/4 on the back may have some trouble in combat, but either way you're going to get a 1/1. This is one of the better sagas in the set. This is a very solid saga that gives you a little bit of everything. It's definitely an A. Selfless Samurai, 1 and a white, for 2/2. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, it gains lifelink until end of turn. And then sacrifice Selfless Samurai. Another target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. Giving lifelink to a creature attacking definitely makes a big difference, and the ability to trade it for whenever a card from your opponent is very strong. Notably, the sacrifice is also not based on attacking alone, so can be used in an all-out attack as well. This is one of the better samurai so far, and is a solid B-. Seven-Tail Mentor, 3 and a white, for a creature Fox Samurai. It's a 2/3. That when it enters the battlefield or dies, put a 1/1 counter on target creature or vehicle you control. We saw this effect with Gavany Townsmith. However, that put the 2 counters immediately, which is a much better effect than this. Having it be a dies trigger on a 2/3, it doesn't give you what you want. It's still a fine effect, in that it's a creature that's not too far behind, but I think it's just going to be outclassed by a lot of other things, and it's a C-. Skyblessed Samurai, 6 and a white, for an enchantment creature human samurai. It's a 4/4 with flying, but it costs 1 less to cast for each enchantment you control. Given the number of enchantments in the set, it's very reasonable to get this to cost 5, and at that point it's similar to a Sarah Angel. Many of the cards in this set are fairly small as well, especially the flyers, so this will outclass just about everything else in combat, excluding the dragons. This is one of the best uncommons in the set, and it's a solid B+. Bearded Companion, 1 and a white for an enchantment creature dog, 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. This is one of those unassuming cards that is actually quite a bit better due to the environment. Being an enchantment matters a lot, and there's a number of things that can recur 2 CMC or less. That makes this much better than it would be otherwise, and as such I actually think it's one of the best commons in the set. Plus they're also a very good boy. It's a B-. Sunblade Samurai, 4 and a white for an enchantment creature, human samurai, 4/4 vigilance. It also has Channel 2. Discard it to search your library for a basic Plains card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, and you gain 2 life. Land cycling has historically been a fairly good ability, and having this on a body that doesn't feel too outclassed makes it much better than it may be otherwise. This is a solid C. Touch of the Spirit Realm, 2 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature until it leaves the battlefield. It also has 2 and a white, channel, to exile target artifact or creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So this is an O-ring type effect, although it misses enchantments, which is fairly notable in this set. It is definitely the best uncommon in the set, and a solid B+. Wanderer's Intervention, 1 and a white for an instant. Wanderer's Intervention deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. This effect is never bad, and 4 is a good amount, as if we just take a look at the creatures already featured in the set, it kills just about all of them. It is situational removal, so we'll miss some of the cards that just sit back and gain value, but it's still a solid B. The Wandering Emperor, 2 white for a legendary planeswalker, comes in with 3 loyalty. It also has Flash, and as long as the Wandering Emperor entered the battlefield this turn, you may activate loyalty abilities anytime you cast an instant. +1 is put a 1/1 counter on up to 1 target creature, it gains first strike until end of turn. -1 is create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance, and then the -2 is exile target tap creature. You gain 2 life. So the play pattern with this is, you leave your 4 mana open, they attack, you then flash this in. You have basically 3 different ways to win the combat. Create a 2/2, just eat a 1/1, you can buff up one of your creatures and the first strike will probably win, or you can just exile a creature. And then on your turn, you're able to make a 2/2. After that, it depends very much on the scenario, but the ability to make a 2/2 as only a -1 is incredibly strong. Most planeswalkers are just complete bombs and limited, and this is no exception. Because of the ambush potential, this is going to feel terrible to lose to and be incredibly oppressive. This is definitely an S, and comparable to the white dragon and how strong it is. When we were young, 3 and a white, instant. Up to 2 target creatures each get +2/+2 until end of turn. If you control an artifact and enchantment, those creatures also gain lifelink until end of turn. Without the lifelink, this is fairly mediocre and definitely can't be played into open mana. With it, it becomes fine. 4 mana for combat trek is a lot to hold up, and something your opponent will definitely play around. Just because of the requirement, this is a C-, maybe a D+. And that's all the white cards in the set. I hope you enjoyed the analysis, and look forward to blue cards soon. If you can like, subscribe, check out my Patreon, and have a lovely day.